What is good, everyone? The day has finally arrived. This is the 10 most haunted places in Connecticut. Connecticut is a very old state with a lot of history. It's one of the original 13 colonies, so as you would assume, it has its fair share of dark history. And dark history usually equals ghosts. So without stalling anymore, let's get right into it. Number 10, New London Ledge Lighthouse. Built 1909, the Ledge Lighthouse had been manned by hundreds of crews until it became automated in 1987. Over the many decades since its creation, there have been many sad occurrences. The first being a ship called Atlantic that crashed in 1846 into the area around what would become the Ledge Lighthouse. 42 people were killed in the accident, and the sunken fog bell can still be heard across Long Island Sound to this day. However, the most famous story is of the legendary ghost Ernie, who had been a caretaker at the lighthouse until 1936 when he committed suicide by slitting his throat and throwing himself off the roof. The story goes, he had recently got married and brought his wife to the lighthouse for an extended honeymoon, but soon the woman grew tired of the lonely lighthouse and of the man she was with. They started arguing often, and she eventually decided it was enough and ran from the lighthouse, leaving Ernie to his long, lonely days as a caretaker. It was eventually too much for him, and he cut his throat for the things he had said, and threw himself to the rocks below. Since the day Ernie committed suicide, there have been strange occurrences in the lighthouse. Televisions and foghorns turned on and off by themselves. Docks were invisibly washed. Doors opened and closed. Boats have been found floating away. An old radio that was moved many times has always ended back in the same spot, as well as names being called without anyone around, the smell of a decomposing body, and the apparition of a tall, slim man with a beard, wearing a rain hat and a raincoat, has been spotted. Could it be that Ernie never left this place, and has been following his same daily routine for nearly a century now? Number 9, Charles Island. Charles Island, a location only accessible by sandbar during low tide off of Milford, Connecticut, bought from Native Americans in February 1639. This island has since been cursed 3 times. The first curse is believed to have come from the Native American chief who had previously owned this island. The reasons are unknown for the curse, but it's likely he either regretted selling the island, or some people believe that his daughter was kidnapped. The first curse is as follows. Any shelter built on the island will crumble to the earth, and they shall be cursed forever. Over the centuries, this curse held to be true, with every building constructed on the island ending up suffering tragedies, and are eventually abandoned completely. One case of this is a monastery built by monks who claimed the curses to be false and Indian folklore. A series of tragedies occurred, including mysterious deaths, suicides, madness, and hauntings, caused them to leave the island. The crumbling ruins of the monastery can still be seen to this day, along with the ghosts of the monks who once inhabited that location. Another story is of a man who opened a restaurant and a lodge on the island, but a mysterious fire broke out and burned the restaurant to the ground. He too left the island forever. The second curse was from the notorious Captain Kidd, who is said to have buried some of his treasure on the island. When he was eventually caught in 1699, he cursed anyone who tried to dig up his treasure to certain death. The final curse was placed in 1721, when 5 sailors stole treasure from a Mexican emperor. It is said that the emperor then cursed the treasure. Before long, 4 of the 5 sailors had met tragic ends. The final men sailed out to Charles Island and buried the treasure there. Many have tried to find the treasures on Charles Island throughout the centuries. None have succeeded. One notable story, however, claims that in 1850, 2 treasure seekers had uncovered an iron chest buried on the island. When they began to remove the chest, a headless, shrieking figure appeared in the sky, surrounded in deep blue flames. It crashed into the pit with the treasure chest. The area exploded in a shower of blue flames. The men ran from the island, leaving their tools and the treasure. The next day, when their courage had returned, they went back only to find their tools were gone and the pit had been filled as if nothing had ever disturbed it. After that, the 2 spent the rest of their lives in mental asylums. The island is now a nature preserve, and there are no trespassers allowed. Number 8. Barrahack Settlement. The settlement of Barrahack hides in the woods of Pomfret, Connecticut. It was considered to be haunted since before it was even founded as a settlement. In 1790, two families relocated from Rhode Island to this section of the state. Even from the beginning, there were strange stories told. One such tale talks of a ghost baby who could be seen reclining in a nearby tree. The settlement only lasted about 100 years before it was completely abandoned, due to economic hardships and many untimely deaths. To this day, people still report the sounds of carriages going about, dogs barking, cows mooing, and other common daily sounds of Barrahack in the 19th century. Also, the same ghost baby can still be seen to this day, as well as a bearded man who is said to hover above the cemetery. Some people believe Barrahack is stuck in time, as if when you enter the village ruins, you are both back in the 1800s when it was a living settlement, and in the current century where it has been abandoned for a century and a half. If this is true, then to the people who lived in Barrahack, could we be the ghosts? Number 7. The John York House. Built in 1741, it wouldn't be long before tragedy struck this home. During the Revolutionary War, the John York House was turned into a tavern. One night, two best friends were drinking rum and talking about their day. Slowly, they came to realize that they loved the same local girl. The calm conversation turned into a heated argument, which in turn became a full-blown fight. It went on until one of the men pulled out a knife and killed his best friend. He then ran from the tavern, angry, saddened, and likely scared. He then took his own life. Since that very day, hauntings have been commonly reported in the home. The bloodstains from the murder were scrubbed and scrubbed, but never came out. Eventually, the boards had to be flipped over. Things such as unexplained sounds, shadows moving, and cold spots were commonplace. But it was about to get worse. In 1963, the Wilms family purchased the home, and instantly the hauntings increased. They decided to hold seances to get to the bottom of it, which only made things worse. Heavy footsteps on the stairs, furniture moving and turning over, household devices turning on by themselves, locked doors opening, the smell of pipe smoke, and a barometer that flew off the wall on multiple occasions. The absolute height of these hauntings was when one night, one of the Wilms' sons was heard screaming. Upon finding him, he was gagging, and red welts were forming around his neck as if somebody was trying to strangle him. They then called in the Warrens, who worked to remove these troubled spirits from the home. It was said that they were successful, but the Wilms left the house anyways in 1987. The home sat vacant for 10 years until it was purchased by the Grote family. While there were still some weird things, such as names being called when no one else was home, and the case of a minivan window exploding, all seemed to be clear. However, as is the case with many haunted places, things can always start again when the time is right. Number 6. Devil's Hop Yard. In the town of East Haddam, near Chapman Falls, there lies an area known as Devil's Hop Yard. Early settlers believed this place was a location the devil himself frequently visited, especially the falls, where he is said to enjoy sitting at the top and watching all who enter his domain. Puritans claimed the devil got hurt once when he was going about the falls. He then angrily stomped about, which left perfectly circular holes where his hooves and tails hit. Another legend talks of a witch who enchanted an oak tree. That very night, the tree lost all its leaves, the twigs shriveled up, sap stopped running, and moss spread throughout its entirety. The tree had never grown leaves or acorns again. A famous story from Devil's Hop Yard takes place in 1999, when 5 men had an unbelievable experience. They went into Devil's Hop Yard at night, and all was fine until one man heard his name, Paul, being called. The voice loudly whispered, "Paul, leave now or you'll join us forever." One of his friends reported hearing this whispering threat as well. The men, unnerved by the situation, decided to leave. As the men were leaving, they heard laughter, and closer to the exit they saw a beast-like figure sitting on a fence, as well as a jagged shadow figure. One of the men was also thrown into a tree, and later found 4 slash marks on his pants. One of the men even said he saw something so frightening that he has never revealed it to anyone. The men then drove to a local pastor's house and asked for help. but the pastor and his family were frightened, so they called the police. The men were then arrested by the police, and upon testing for alcohol or drugs, they were found to be clean. To this day, visitors report shadows moving, eerie mists, demonic voices, sounds of laughter, uneasy feelings, and many have reported the sounds of hooves running next to cars going down the road beside Devil's Hop Yard. Fairfield Hills State Hospital. Opened in 1933 with only 500 patients to start with, it grew to hold more than 4,000 by the 1960s. It was a place that was supposed to be meant for healing, but more often than not, it was torture. Hydrotherapy, insulin shock therapy, lobotomies, and electroconvulsive therapy were some of the abuses that patients had to face. This even resulted in many suicides and mysterious deaths. Stories of abuse and cruelty were so numerous that in 1945, the superintendent was forced to resign. With a history like this, it is not surprising Fairfield Hills is haunted. Reports of banging, orbs, screams, feelings of being followed, and shadow figures are common in every part of the hospital. Hauntings are especially severe in the underground tunnels, where doctors used to transport and even hold patients in its shadowed hallways. A ghost many people have reported here is a lady wearing white, who people have seen peering out of windows in the hospital. Remington Arms Factory. Opened in 1867 as the Union Metallic Cartridge Company, it was purchased by Remington Arms in 1915, soon becoming one of America's top munition factories and a major arms manufacturer during both world wars, producing up to 10,000 rifles per day. With factory conditions so brutal in America at that time, the Remington Arms Factory was no stranger to fatal accidents. One tragic story tells of 2 employees who fell into a vat of molten metal, dying instantly. Another event was a major explosion on the production floor, which killed 7 workers and wounded 80 others. During a riot in 1915, 2 rioters were fighting with the guards, and one man had his head bashed in with a baton. With events like these, it is no surprise Remington Arms is haunted. Many shadow figures have been reported, as well as disembodied voices, the sounds of factory work, yelling, orbs, strange mists, and the feelings of dread. In 2009, the Ghost Adventures crew visited this location and confirmed many of these phenomenon, including mysterious sounds of a riot, multiple EVPs, equipment malfunctioning, and even a gunshot. Number 3. Norwich State Hospital. Opened in 1904, Norwich State Hospital originally housed people with mental illnesses and those guilty of crimes by insanity. It eventually grew to treat all illnesses and conditions. The hospital started with only around 100 people, but its peak was in 1955 when they housed 3,186 patients. However, as was common in hospitals at the time, abuse was rampant. In order to control the population, the hospital would resort to extreme measures, such as beatings, starvings, overly harsh restraints, and extended solitary confinement. Even electroshock therapy and lobotomies were used not to treat, but to control. Many suicides and murders had occurred over the decades of operation. There was a man who hung himself in 1914, a water heater explosion that killed 2 employees, a nurse who died crossing the road, and all of the unfortunate patients who died during their stays, or while undergoing treatments. After a long dark history, it is no wonder these multiple abandoned wards are said to be haunted. Hauntings in Norwich State Hospital include shadow figures, disembodied voices, terrible feelings, EVPs, and objects moving on their own. Norwich State Hospital was even visited by the Ghost Hunters crew in 2010, and they recorded odd shadows, strange noises, and moving objects. Number 2. Union Cemetery. Union Cemetery in Easton, Connecticut is said to be one of America's most haunted graveyards. Burials in the location began in the 1700s, with the oldest remaining gravestone being from 1761. There have been many stories of tragic events in and around the area, one being a man who was burned alive across the street in 1935, who many claim to be the infamous Red Eyes, a pair of glowing red eyes that watch people at night when they're walking through the cemetery. However, the most famous spirit is that of the White Lady. People have been reporting sightings of the White Lady and the noisy ghosts that surround her for decades. No one knows her true story, but many believe she was a woman who unfortunately drowned in the swamps in the area. Or she could also be a murder victim whose body was disposed of in a sinkhole nearby. She is not only seen walking through the cemetery, but also along Route 59, where many drivers have swerved out of the way to avoid a lady in white. One story of this occurrence is a man who hit a lady in a long white gown. The woman flew over the top of the car and landed in the road behind him. When he got out of his car, the hood was dented, but there was no one there. Ed Warren, the famous demonologist, used to frequent the cemetery and even wrote a book about it called Graveyard. He even got video evidence of the White Lady. Number 1. Dudleytown. The story of Dudleytown actually starts a long time ago, when King Henry VIII cursed Edmund Dudley and his entire lineage. Fast forward to the 1600s, when two members of the Dudley family bought a plot of land from a nearby farmer. Shortly after that, it was dubbed Dudleytown. But likely due to the curse, there's a long, dark history in Dudleytown. A history of sudden, inexplicable deaths, weird animal sightings, mysterious disappearances, mutilations, epidemics, and demonic confrontations. Here are a few of the stories from Dudleytown. In 1759, Nathaniel Carter bought A.B.L. Dudley's home, but left a few years later to New York, because the rest of the Carter family in Dudleytown had been wiped out by a cholera outbreak. Shortly after they had settled down in New York, his family was attacked. Mr. and Mrs. Carter were murdered, and their cabin was burned. Their children were kidnapped and sold for ransom. Another resident, General Herman Swift, who served under George Washington in the Revolutionary War, had a terrible loss when his wife Sarah Fay was struck by lightning on their front porch. Herman Swift was said to have become demented shortly thereafter. The very last resident of Dudleytown, John Brophy, was driven insane, claiming to see terrifying green spirits and giant animals with cloven hooves that he said tried to enslave him. At some point, his wife died of consumption. Then his two children one day went into the woods and were never seen again. Shortly after this, he left Dudleytown, also never to be seen again. Dudleytown sat vacant for 20 years, until Dr. William Clark bought some land in 1920, along with some colleagues who then formed the Dark Entry Forest Association. A few years later, he left his wife for an emergency in New York City. He returned after a mere 36 hours and came back to find his wife had gone insane, after she said something terrible came out of the forest and attacked her. To this day, this remains one of the most haunted locations in America, with many people reporting slaps, punches, and slashes. People have reported there being no sounds from wildlife and being unnaturally quiet throughout the surrounding area. Also, shadowy figures have been reported following people, and there are claims of a wolf-like shadow that watches people from the woods. What makes this place even worse is that there are devil worshippers who likely regularly use Dudleytown's remains for rituals. And there you have it, the 10 most haunted places in Connecticut. Leave a like and subscribe if you like this content, and comment down below what state you would like to see next. Peace.